Okay, great. So let's start this panel about the modification question. Very happy to have our guests here. So I'll start with Xavier de Roquemaurel, founder of Czapek, reinitiator of the Czapek brand. Ted will do a few parallels between the world of cars, obviously, and watchmaking. Max, founder of MB&F, and Gianfranco from the Fondation, expert in watchmaking, of course. So by the modification, obviously, this can be a pretty large spectrum because we talk about, indeed, simple modification, but whereas we can talk about bespoke timepieces and personalization of watches through configurators. And we're going to start immediately then with Max and give us your take about your vision about bespoke timepieces. Why don't you do bespoke timepieces?
I actually wondered why I was invited, because I refuse all bespoke. It's philosophical first, meaning when I created MB&F, it was really a life decision, and it was about trying to recapture more of that artist part of my childhood and less be a marketeer. And I felt that if I was actually accepting special requests from clients, I was selling out. And so initially, from the beginning, it was like, we don't do bespoke. There are other reasons to that. It's interesting because I was having this discussion with one of my esteemed colleagues of another small brand who said, oh, you should accept if the client buys like 10 of your pieces, he could get into a category where he's allowed to do a bespoke. And we have a certain amount of very good customers who are on my back saying, when are you going to do something special for me? And I'm like, never. And the problem is, if you do accept that, if you accept one door opening, then the floodgates open up. And everybody you've said no to for the last 12 years goes, well, now me, what about me? And it brings you to another thing is, you can actually see one of your very good clients and say, I'm sorry, I will not do bespoke for you because I don't do bespoke. But then if you start accepting, and the gentleman or lady says, look, I want to put a Hello Kitty on the dial, and I want to put red subnumerals and whatever, and you think this is god-awful, how do you tell a good client that it's absolutely awful and you're not going to do it for them? And then you start actually antagonizing them. So rather than actually even going down that road, I decided the door was locked forever. Let's see in 10 years if I keep my thing.
You were also mentioning that your previous experience at Harry Winston, where bespoke was actually a big part of the business, or at least tried to be a big part of the business, it was also logistically complicated to handle.
So at Harry Winston, Harry Winston is a bespoke jeweler. So when we were doing the watches, clearly we had to do bespoke for the clients. And actually very few clients had the courage to take it to that next step. And if they did, it's very difficult to read a design. So I don't know, we would have a watch and the person would say, well, I would like a green dial and maybe the lugs like this or setting like that. So you start doing drawings for them. One drawing, two drawings, three drawings. They're like, oh, maybe it's not a green dial I want. Maybe it's actually a blue dial. Can we do the counters like this? And you do a seventh drawing and an eighth drawing. And then finally you're like, okay, are you going to do something? And they do. And then, I don't know, 6 months, 12 months, a year later, you come out with the product. And because they're not used to reading drawings, they get that product and they're like, that's not what I wanted. And you end up actually antagonizing a client, which you're actually wanting to make him happy, but it's exactly the contrary. There's all these different experiences have told me, like, you know what? I'm not going down that road.
And never really being tempted. If somebody comes with a big check for you.
It's happened. It's happened. I've had a gentleman come and say, like, make me the Henry Graves of the 21st century. I'm like, sorry. And whatever the budget. And I had to say, like, no, that's not how it works. It's, at MB&F, it's my ideas, my story. It's a very egoistic process. And that I'm not going to do anything for you or because you want the most complicated watch or whatever. And actually, they actually do respect that after a certain time.
So we're going to talk with Xavier. You have almost a total opposite story to tell us, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't go in opposition with what Max is saying, because it's a different story. It's a different beginning. It's a different brand. And I think he explained very well that he is the creator. And for Czapek, we wanted the opposite. We wanted Czapek to be revived. And we didn't want that revival to be just the question of one person or the question of a trio. But we wanted everyone having a stake in the company to be part of this revival. So we opened the shareholding to everyone who wanted to become a shareholder, mostly focusing on other people loving watches. And of course, these people became our first customers. And most of them came with ideas. And I understood that, because when I was young, when I got married, my wife and myself, we imagined the jewel she would wear, and it was a beautiful jewel, and we did it with the jeweler. So I was thinking, yeah, it's a fair thing. I mean, if I have to imagine a beautiful watch, I would like it to be as much as possible mine. But then we were confronted to some of the stories that Max lived. So people not capable to express very well what they wanted, hesitating, not understanding. So we understood that we needed to help the process. So one rule is everything has to go with one of our two designers. There is not a customer designing. We design. If he doesn't like, it's okay. We stay friends, but we design. And the second one was coming from Sébastien, the watchmaker, one of the trio at the beginning. One of our providers actually created an enamel Grand Feu dial with a secret signature for us. So it's written Czapek with a process that is known for about 200 years in enamel makers of having secret signature. And Sébastien wanted to make a watch for his dad. And he said, could I use that technique to actually write something for my dad that nobody else could see? Only him, or only the person that he would tell that, look here, and he will see a full sentence. And we said, oh, that's super cool. So we launched that dial in Basel, and we presented it actually also to the GPHG with the watch. And a lot of people were amazed about that. And so we said, okay, we're going to create a rule, which is one person, one sentence, one dial, and we never repeat. And so it's more expensive, of course, but it doesn't affect the design. They just have to think, what is a 33-character long sentence or sign or coat of arm that I want to have on my dial. And that became suddenly, like, they all wanted it. Okay, so that's suddenly, and it's continuing like this. So we have more bespoke enamel dials than standard enamel dials. But as you can see, it's a bespoke with a very clear, concept. We don't go outside this 33 character. We don't do everything that somebody would like to do, because it's difficult. It's very difficult to design beautiful watches. Mm-hmm. But we are also in line with Czapek culture. He was making watches for one customer, and whoever the customer was, it was always a Czapek watch. So he had a way that we are trying to find, which is to influence the customer to do, in a soft manner, a Czapek watch, keeping into the middle the desire of the customer. So that's a bit of our experience in making highly personalized or bespoke watches.
Okay, so we talked about bespoke, and we'll get to the real modification in a little bit. But now let's talk about personalization, and there are solutions there, even from big brands, where you can configure yourself and choose the color of your dial or hand, and you have a few type of choices. I can think about, Breitling that does that, Xavier de Roquemaurel also, and Armin Ström that have launched also their configurator right now. So what is your take on these kind of solutions? And I will ask Gianfranco about this.
I think
We should come back to the question, what is just modifying something and adding or changing something and something existing, and what is truly bespoken or personalizing. And the limit, it's not clear. To simplify, I think modifying, just taking something and adding or changing something for some reason, whatever. And personalizing, it sounds more personal. It means there is something on your story you want to bring in the other story inside. So then I understand if somebody says, no, I don't accept it. I sell my story. I'm egoistic. He said it, right? So it's interesting. It's like a flag. If you have a flag on your country, you cannot put a smile on it and put it on your garden because everybody will say, oh, a flag, you cannot touch it, respect it. So I see it like this, a kind of similar approach. But in another way, personalizing, why not? It's part of luxury. Luxury, it means prestige, it means individual, it means going in requests of somebody which ask an artist or whatever to do something differently. So it's a beautiful way, in my mind. It needs a kind of true story behind. It means if I want to personalize something, why I want to do it? What is the reason behind it? And the more interesting point is, are people really able, and I agree what they are saying, are people really able to bring this taste, this balance between elegance, between technicity, between style, and have their own taste, and finally do something really beautiful. Like in wine, so many people drink wine, but so many people are still able to do comparison between some wines on a kind of cepage or kind of origins. It's quite difficult. So that's why I understand some people love to take an existing brand, existing model, which is recognized by everybody, just modifying. It means I buy something which is recognized by everybody, and I just add something more to personalize to my story. And only few people probably are able to say, no, I want to begin from scratch and begin with another artist to build something together. It's two completely different way to do.
But we'll talk indeed about modifying something that is existing. I'm thinking also just in terms of this personalization of I mean, in today's evolving society, people want to express their identity, their personality through the little things that say, okay, I'm part of the story basically, and I'm different from somebody else. And doing that by easy solutions, again, with those kind of configurators. When you buy a car today, I mean, when you buy it new, you can choose so many different things, you know, to make it the way you want it. Why in watchmaking is this so complicated?
I would very quickly draw the parallel to the relationship that Porsche had with the Porsche community up until I don't know if you guys know this guy named Magnus Walker, who's quite famous in the Porsche community for modifying his cars. Porsche hated this guy. They despised him. They thought he was the devil incarnate, that he was just corrupting something that was so pure and so iconic and so much like many of the watches that we are talking about here today. They viewed this guy as the Antichrist. And until he became so big that they couldn't ignore him. And then they realized that there is a whole universe out there of people that choose to devote their energy, their time, their paycheck, their entire lives to these objects so seriously that they make them their own. So to take a 1967 Porsche and to modify it, to put a different engine into it, to put a different wing on the back, to make it something that is uniquely you, actually, they had to very slowly learn that it was something that represented a huge amount of passion and something that ultimately would be quite monetizable if they embraced it. So when Porsche went from sending cease and desist letters to Magnus Walker to actually sponsoring his campaigns to travel the world and evangelize on behalf of Porsche, that represented to me something that I think is very similar to the way in which LVMH embracing George Bamford represents the watch industry. And I think that's something that is, all industries will face. People that are so deeply passionate about the product. Somebody that might buy one of your watches and say, I love this thing so much, but I wish it was DLC. Maybe there's someone out there who would do that.
And everybody is free to buy one of my pieces and do whatever he wants with it. Once they've bought it, it's theirs. They want to modify it completely, I'm fine.
But what I've found fascinating about the Porsche example was that it represented such an institutional level of insecurity about their product, that they were uncomfortable with someone owning it out there in the world and having it be something that didn't come from the hand of Dr. Ferdinand Porsche or from the hand of one of their engineers. It was such a bizarre level of insecurity when they'd already sold hundreds of thousands, now over 1 million 911s. It made no sense to me. So to see them embrace this world of customization in the same way that I see Jean-Claude Biver embrace people like George Bamford, it says to me that you actually are confident enough in your position in the world as a company or as a producer, as an engineer, as a designer, that you are comfortable with somebody going out there and taking the watch, much like Max just said, and taking it to a level that is hyper-personal. So,
Gianfranco?
I think there are also two phenomena to understand which evolved in the last 50 years. First of all, the generation of clients which are more egocentric oriented, means not egoistic, but millennials. They want to have personalized things, and they live through how much can I personalize things to my taste today. That's one trend. But the other one is the technical one. Don't forget, in the watch industry, was still depending on a lot of suppliers. Even if a manufacturer produces something, we have dozens of suppliers, and some part of the watch still was a critical part of the watch in question of delivery times. And 50 years ago to have, or even 10 years ago, I hope you can confirm it, if you order just a dial, which is different than your 500 other dials, you had to wait 6 months until 12 months. So this was nearly not possible technically to react quickly to specificities requested by clients. Of course, I'm not talking about the high-end, the highest end, which is still done in bespoke a long time ago already, but in classical series. Today with new processes, new method of working, to new method of designing a movement or designing the daily watch, it's completely different. So it means you can be much more reactive and offer this kind of personalized version. Like we had in Basel, I counted at least 7 different brands which made a new concept to personalize watches. Different than just changing the color bracelet. I mean, more than just changing the few external parts. So that's a huge trend which technicity allows it, and the market today requests much more than in the past, in my mind.
Yes?
So to answer, to continue on the idea of configuration, I had the chance to work in fashion and in men's fashion, where we do a lot of bespoke tailoring. So for me, when we started Czapek, it was evident that we needed to include a simple level of personalization for everyone. So we actually thought about the watches in the way of, we never produce watches in advance. Every watch is unique, is treated unique as if there is a single customer behind. Because it's a shop, but it's the same process. So in 3 weeks, if you order today, for example, a Czapek, you can choose your hands, you can choose the dial, you can choose if you want the days of the week in French, in English. If they're in stock, in 3 weeks, we make your watch. And we ship it in 4 weeks, you have it. Which was the time we had actually in Xenia when I was working there. So I had the idea that, okay, a man in 4 weeks is happy to wait that amount of time. And we designed the whole process from there. But again, here we are not talking about bespoke. If we do bespoke, a unique dial, then we're talking 3 months, 6 months. We would do it, but it would go outside a simple configurator. So again, it's a matter of thinking of what level of personalization we accept. However, I defend the idea that at that level of luxury, we need to give to the customer the way to, make it his own watch with a special engraving, with something that is unique, that maybe he will be the only one to see, with a special color of a strap that doesn't exist, is not in the range, but that we will do with a small bespoke person. Because we work with craftsmen. And all these independent craftsmen in the Jura, they like to do special things also. They like this idea of, I'm going to do something that I never did before. So it's just a platform to keep that way of processing and creating.
Or not.
I think your mic is not functioning.
Really? There we go. You have to declare if you're doing bespoke or not. It's a question of brand integrity. There are too many brands today who will come out with a limited edition of 50 pieces in platinum of whatever new complication they're doing, and then we'll do a one-off platinum with baguettes for Mr. X, and one-off platinum in round diamonds, Mr. Y, and et cetera, but they're not declared. And that's one of the things I've been telling our clients also. When we came out with the perpetual, no, actually the Legacy 2 in platinum, I had a very big client saying, I want a different color dial. We were only doing 25 in platinum, and they all had the blue dial. I'm saying, if I'm doing a 26th for you, I'm betraying the trust of all other 25. And they said, oh, well, do one of the 25 for me. But then I'm betraying the 24 others. Because if you declare it, if it's a fact, and that's what the brand does, fine. But if you play games, and there are too many people in this industry who do, then it really jeopardizes your brand integrity.
Let's speak about the limited edition of 25 and the 15 prototypes sold on the side, no? Another example, and we won't cite the names. And it's true, it's so true that actually when we do a limited edition, we don't do what the bespoke thing. We do it, the bespoke, on the main collection that is not a limited edition collection. So effectively, we were confronted to that question, and we decided, okay, that's the number of movements, and that's the number of prototypes, and we write it, and we respect that.
Coming back to a car example, if you're talking about Ferrari or Lamborghini and things like that, I don't know the numbers, but what would you say is the percentage of people asking for different variants of their cars, I don't know, different color of seats or something like that? What's the percentage of personalized cars in this high luxury segment?
I'm not sure that any of the percentages are actually public whatsoever, but I do know that the most profitable regions of Ferrari are definitely the customer-specific requests. Porsche's, they had a great word for it in German. I think you might know what it is. There's a...
like 19 syllables.
It's basically like Dream Wish program, but in German, or something like that, and it's...
in German, I think. Will amuse us.
It sounds almost like Gespannt für ein Flitzebogen or something like that. It sounds so like specific, okay. and they've really made it into a thing. So, and I believe it started around the 959 program, if I'm not mistaken, but something around that era of Porsche allowed you to come in and kind of lobby for a wish. You didn't get it necessarily, but you could sort of put together like your dream book and put it on the altar of Porsche and stand back and like just empty your bank account into the altar and hope that somebody gave you a snakeskin dash kind of thing. BMW's had this called the BMW Individual Program. All car companies have this, but they don't publicize it necessarily. That's becoming less and less the case. Porsche now is quite public about what you're able to actually ask for. You can put a 6-speed manual in your Targa C4S, and you can put a houndstooth interior using a special fabric that traditionally was only reserved for the Porsche family. That's something that you couldn't necessarily do 5 years ago. And I think, like back to the point of Magnus Walker and embracing the whole ethos of people that are so passionate that they're willing to just forego all kind of logical cost sense. You know, a Porsche is a Porsche is a Porsche, but some people are willing to pay 3x for that Porsche if it feels a bit more like theirs. And yeah, I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's done more to spread the ethos of these brands around the world than otherwise. In the same way that, you know, I'm definitely the only guy on the stage wearing a Bamford watch right now. And, you know, some people think that's a bit sacrilegious. But, you know, I'm not sure how many Hoyer Monicos that TAG is going to make this year, but I'm guessing it's a shit ton. And the fact that maybe 50 or 100 over the next few months will get customized, those people are then going to go spend all of their time and energy saying how much they love the TAG Heuer Monaco. And it's not like we're taking one of the Siddiqui family watches with the UAE crest and scratching it off and trying to put Rolex back on it. Like these are mass-produced watches at this point. And I think that there's a certain level of latitude that you should be allowed as a consumer to go say, you know what, I want it to have red faces and look a bit like someone from Star Wars kind of thing. I think you're totally allowed to do that in my mind. But then again, I think that there's a different question about certain types of watches that are maybe historical or you know, that have significance or are very limited in the sense that you can't just go out and buy one for chips by comparison. So I don't know. I think that's a constantly evolving question.
So Max, you were saying that I mean, once a customer buys one of your watch, basically he could do whatever he wants. I mean, and I think that's pretty respectful of your customer in a certain way. But then comes the question of the guarantees and all those kind of things. How would you respond to somebody coming back with a watch that he DLC'd, for instance?
That's a good question. Luckily, it's never happened. If you start opening up the watch and touching the movement and the casing, you're taking the risk that I'm actually going to void the warranty. But people who do transformations like Bamford and others, they actually give their own warranty. And I'm actually, amazingly, I'm completely for customization of products. I think what I see George Bamford doing, which initially was like only blackening watches, which like, okay, you can probably do better than that. Now he's a super creative, artistic thing. He does really cool creations based on the good old icons of our industry, and why not? I must admit, Ted, is maybe a question. Why do you think big brands, except for Mr. Beaver's brands, are so against what George Bamford does?
Personally, before I spent a lot of time getting to know George and getting to know his process and what he does to these watches, I did have an issue with the potential ramifications of being a customer that buys, let's say, a Rolex and then voids their warranty with Rolex. That just seemed kind of like a raw deal for the customer, especially when you're paying 3 or 4x sticker to customize something. So let's say a GMT is 8 or 9 grand. You're paying £22,000 to customize a GMT to the point where now it's no longer covered by Rolex, and if you ever walk into a Rolex dealer, just struck me as slightly duplicitous. And to see the way that he structured the deal with LVMH, to have it be fully backed by the company as for the movement at the very least, that just felt right. Like if you're going to do this, you shouldn't be penalized. You shouldn't feel like some sort of criminal for vandalizing an artwork, with few exceptions perhaps. But as a customer who says, I love the Monaco, everyone has the Steve McQueen one, I'd prefer if mine was just different, I think you should be celebrated. I think you should be like, okay, cool, let's find a way to do it. And we found this guy that's able to do it really well.
So why do you think the big brands are antagonized by his work?
It goes back to my point about insecurity. It's something that's rampant within the watch industry. It's rampant within the car industry. It's unsophisticated marketers who sit around and get nervous about what people perceive their product to be. That's the only way I can perceive it as a customer. I don't necessarily know that's 100% the case, but to me it strikes me as something that's deeply rooted in the way that the integrity of their product. They might be insecure about the way that they've perceived in the marketplace. You have watches that sell for $30,000 that on the secondary market sell for $10,000. That company, let's say Parmigiani, for instance, is a great example of an incredibly high quality product that on the secondary market takes a huge hit. They might be insecure about somebody modifying their product because it might erode some sort of brand integrity or brand equity, whatever it might be. I just don't think that the Swiss watch industry, much like the car industry, needs to come from any sort of place of insecurity. It needs to come from a place of confidence and strength and pride in what they do, and that largely is the case. But to see somebody threaten constantly through back channels like Rolex did for like a decade to sue Bamford into non-existence was just bizarre to me. It's like this is one of the largest companies on earth that does more product and more volume and more margin than almost any other company. And here they are threatening to sue this guy whose dad makes tractors. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. It's like they don't have to do that. And I think that I could say the same for almost every other brand that's here this week, is that they don't have to come from a place of insecurity or they should be from a place of strength and pride. And much like you saying, you buy my watch, it's yours. And that should be the case. But I also just don't think that you should be penalized if you choose to DLC a Legacy Machine 002.
If you start opening the watch up and that we haven't controlled it afterwards, you're taking a risk. And that's where Jean-Claude Beaver very smartly, I thought, said, okay, we embrace it, Bamford does the black DLC and whatever, and then the watch is controlled again by Zenith or Tag or whatever, and then it's got a factory warranty. If you start dabbling and opening up the movement by somebody who we don't know how good he is, you're taking a risk.
To quote
To quote George, during his negotiations with Jean-Claude Biver, Jean-Claude sat down with him and he said, "Why are you spending all of your time, energy, and money evangelizing for a brand that hates you?" And it's a genuine question. What the hell was he thinking? Like every fiber of his being for, what was it, a decade, went into doing PR for Rolex, and Rolex never thanked him once. All they ever did was say, actually, you know, we'd like to destroy you. And when Jean-Claude came along and sat him down and said, look, I have the opportunity to take 3 or 4 of my brands that you know, might not necessarily be the sexiest brands. Let's say Zenith is not the sexiest brand in the world right now, and we have the opportunity to do something very special. And we have the opportunity to take a heritage chrono, we have the opportunity to take an El Primero and make it something that becomes an object of virtu for a generation that never even knew the watch existed. I think that's great.
Sticking with the Bamford example, I mean, and the car industry, and talk about Mercedes, for instance, I mean, we had AMG on the side doing their stuff, and it suddenly, when it got integrated directly within Mercedes, and in a certain way, what Bamford is going through is a little bit like this. It's the same type of story. Do you think there are other players out there, or brands that will be embracing this move in the future?
Other brands meaning other Bamford-type tuners of watches?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Meaning that brands will endorse officially those kind of tuning-type companies.
I don't think Rolex will ever do it.
No, Rolex probably not.
They'll never do it. I assume that the rest of the LVMH portfolio will eventually end up in Bamford's hands. I'm guessing he'll get Omega in the next few months. He'll probably get a handful. I would not be shocked if he got Jaeger. Like there's other brands that I think will be quite happy to have the publicity that he affords them. You know, he's somebody that touches an audience that is geometrically younger than the average audience that is touched by most of these brands. Just picture the average Instagram follower of Audemars Piguet. Who is that guy? You know, he's in his 30s or 40s or 50s. I don't know. Well, who is that man? I know for a fact that the people that follow Bamford, or that follow Titan Black, or follow any of these customizers out there, they look a lot more like somebody in their mid to late 20s who's actually just made his first bit of coin. He goes, you know what? Like, I don't want my dad's GMT. I want something that's a bit more flash. I want something that's a bit more under the radar. Whatever it is, he wants that. And I think that that's going to continue in a way that's unstoppable. Whether or not, you know, brands choose to endorse it, it doesn't really matter, because once you bought the watch, you bought the watch. But I would not be shocked if the next 2 to 3 years you see Bamford specifically officially working with maybe 30% of all watch brands, 40%. You know, he's already got Bulgari, he's got Tag, he's got what else? He's got 4 or 5 brands he's working with officially. Why would that stop? Unless he's unable to deliver sales figures, which I don't have access to.
What changed with Bamford? Bamford or any of the other guys is, instead of being a tuner, like we used to have that word in the car industry, he becomes more of an artist. And instead of just blackening watches, like any dude can do that, he started creating have an artistic approach. I mean, last year, way before, but we launched last year my Legacy 1, redesigned by Alain Silberstein. I went to see Alain and said, I love your work. This is my Legacy 1, redo it, redesign it. And then we actually made it to his specifications with his name, because he's an artist for me who redesigned my piece. If Bamford and all these other guys, like actually Magnus Walker is now perceived as an artist in his domain. And every one of his pieces is like a work of art based on an industrial car. And if these guys, these tuners, instead of just being, I'm blackening your piece, or I'm doing a Snoopy on the dial, actually do become more artistic, they will be much more embraced, except maybe by Rolex, by most of the brands. I don't know if that's a general perception.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I think we are discussing about some exception which doesn't do it, but the majority of brands today already do. kind of personalization. Even the high brand, like Vacheron has the L'Atelier Cabinotier, Jaeger-LeCoultre made already a long time ago personalized watches. The new concept from Armin Strom, it's a modern way to do it. There are many solutions like this which already are existing today. In my mind, it's just how it's done, and this external company which brings this kind of freshness, and in fact it's at the moment just mostly black, but it's not only black because they play a lot with light, luminova and new things, so it will be much more. But it's just an intermediary step. I'm guessing brands will do it themselves as soon as they will be able to do it in a logistical way. That's the challenge, to do it. That's the big purpose. Those which find the solution, they will do it in 1, 2, 3 years. But at the moment, few companies, we're still speaking about the same one, but there are a few other ones which do similar things, and even more than this company. They are just a middle way to what in the future will be watchmaking, except few exceptions, which still will be here with reasonable reasons. And that's just the beginning of what we are observing now, I'm sure.
And one point we didn't address is that obviously if you personalize to your own taste, again, it might not suit other people. So coming on the notion of the resale value of your product. I mean, basically you're taking a risk because something that was really personal for you probably maybe won't suit other people. So what do you think about that?
I know an example from a famous watch. Somebody engraved a name behind it, and recently was sold for 50 millions. It was a kind of personalization, which added value.
Yeah.
There was no name on that watch.
And you're right. It was a message.
Right.
Drive safely.
Not the name. Thank you.
I get a polarizing response on this tag. It's 50-50 down the line. People go, that's disgusting and hideous and gauche and new money and whatever. And then the other half would go, yeah, absolutely. But then again, I would never buy this watch to resell it, if that makes sense. I think by the time I've taken the time to make something mine, it's mine, and hopefully my grandson will like it someday, and if not, he can go fuck himself. Like,
The question
I don't know
is,
him yet.
but are values only monetized? The reason why we are here, I mean, it's much beyond money. If we love watches, if we love time, it's not related to that. And if somebody is trying to make money out of personalization, there is something that is illogical.
No, I'm not talking making money. I'm talking about
Yeah,
losing money there.
But it's not a question of money. It's a question of, I love that watch and I want it to be mine. And I want to give it to someone after, and I want it to represent what I believe in at that moment of time. That's the values that are much more important than the pure money of, or the pure cost of the watch, or the pure price of the watch.
So you're saying that with your example, it basically takes like 3-4 weeks extra to do this little customization. And I remember with Jaeger-LeCoultre when they introduced that their Reversal Studios, I can't remember what it was called. You had to wait at least 3 months to change basically the color of the hands and things like that. I mean, 3 months seems like a very long time to do that. I mean, and you have to be a bit more just in time. So Gianfranco, what do you think that they can improve these processes to make it more, just deliver the watches more rapidly?
It's what happens actually. Every company is trying to perform better on this side, in the hidden side, in the delivery time, and how you can, as you said, you also already do it. You already prepare parts, and you wait the last minute before assembling, and it was even the success of big companies like Rolex and Omega also opened a new stock in Switzerland. The purpose is to just build, like in the car industry, in last minute, just in time effect. So as soon as you can do it, so the market will be more and more bespoke and more individualized. But the tricky point is how much individualization you truly have. Because for me, it's still an open question. Why does people need to buy a famous watch and then to personalize? If they really want something special, they begin from scratch. But it doesn't happen so many times. I could speak with few companies which do really individualized watches, and they said 50 to 80% are famous models, and people just change few parts on it. But you still have to recognize it's this brand or this model. And that's funny. That's an interesting question for me.
One thing that changed when LVMH embraced Bamford is that the margins went way down because Bamford was able to buy at a wholesale retail rate from the watch company directly, so he was able to build his margin into the product much like a jeweler would. So what went from possibly, like I said earlier, doubling the price of a GMT to add DLC and a couple other things that cost on the high street to do at a no-name place a couple £100, you now have a certified warranted watch from Tag Heuer that cost you only an extra $1,000 or $2,000, whatever it was. It's a negligible margin increase that makes it far more approachable to somebody that actually just wants something of their own. So, the guy who's just gotten his first bonus at his bank decides, I want the Monaco and I want DLC and I want red dials like this watch. It's not going to cost him 25 grand. It's a $5,000 watch that has an extra $2,000 worth of modification done. It's not that unreasonable. So it immediately changes the economies of scale of a business like George's. It goes from, I can do 50 watches a year of Rolexes and have to artificially increase the margin by 200% to, I'm going to charge you a reasonable rate to do reasonable work that's going to be warranted. That's the difference, I think.
Yeah, talking about the warranty. So what you were saying before, Max, so if somebody came with the gem set version of one of your watches, so it didn't move and didn't change anything, didn't open basically the movement part, you would still guarantee it.
If they're going to start gem setting a case, they better take the movement out before.
Yeah,
he wouldn't even let you in the store, I don't think.
And everything, and they're going. I don't know if it's going to be water resistant, because maybe there's not enough material to. Because we don't on purpose put a ton of gold just in case one day we'll diamond set it. We don't diamond set our pieces, etc., etc. So no, it's you take your risk. You really do. Now, at the end of the day, we're reasonable people. So if somebody's gone and bought a piece and then decided to modify it, we sit down and we discuss about it. But it's never happened, luckily for me.
Do you meet people that go swimming with your legacy machine?
All the pieces are water resistant 3 atmospheres. I now put on purpose crocodile straps. So honestly, in 12 years, I have never had one piece come back of any of our pieces because it was not water resistant. We've got 2 models where we put rubber straps, and that's because we know they're 50 meters water resistant. So we're more. So luckily, it's never happened.
And also to answer the discussion about why bigger companies do it with difficulty and smaller companies. Well, when you're a startup, you have a white sheet of paper, and in the end, you are the reflection of your customers. A company like us is like a small tree that is growing. We are just gardener. It's going to grow. We're going to help it go in one direction, but the client is really the sun. So if suddenly one person asks for something and he is important for us because he's a shareholder, and then there is a second one, and then there is a third one, then you think, okay, there is something happening there. So because you've got a white sheet of paper and you're just 4 cats running after making that happen, you can change your plan and adapt to it. And suddenly you realize that because you're faster than anyone else, you become more exciting, so you accelerate more. No? So we don't decide all. There is a vision where we want to go, and I think it's good because Max expressed very clearly his vision, and we expressed ours. And then in that direction, then we adapt to the situation to answer what the clients want. But it's really a matter of working together as partners to create something and to design a company that answers that. That's it.
Interesting. So now I guess it's time for questions from our audience. Any questions?
Ted touched on this subject very briefly, but we've been talking about the reaction from the brands, quite often very strong, especially Rolex, against customization. But we haven't spoken a lot about the massive, I would say sometimes vicious attack by other collectors of that brand. Whenever we've published articles on customized watches, there will be, say, 100 very negative comments, very passionate, for everyone that says, please let me know where you got that done. So it's not just the brands feeling insecure from a financial point of view. There's just a lot of passion out there from some of the watchers.
I can very comfortably say, if you think brands are insecure, collectors are 10 times more insecure. I mean, we all know that. I mean, look around the room. You have people that are, investing in watches that are worth many times more than most people's homes. You tell me that person is insecure in the same way that someone who invests in a stock isn't insecure? Collectors are always insecure. But and in the same way, to your point, there are always going to be people that are fans of what people do, that are customizing. So I think it's just down the middle. You have people who have invested in Rolexes and look at something like a customized Rolex Bamford as eroding somewhat of the brand equity that allows them to earn a return on investment. And then you have people that go, damn, I wish I thought of that. That's genius. I wish, oh God, that looks so cool. That Snoopy dial, oh my God, that's insane. So I think that, again, insecurity is something that drives a lot of the rare valuable marketplace, in every single way, shape, and form. So either you embrace it and you decide that you put your flag in the ground and say, this is mine, this is what I like doing, or you sort of follow around retweeting Hodinkee articles hoping the value of your Daytona goes up. How do you want to spend your life, frankly?
And as human beings, we are taken between two opposite positions, which is either I buy a Rolex like everybody else, or I'm unique and I want to have a unique product. And we have to decide. And we're not in a lifetime always the same.
What's that line from Batman? You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain, I think.
Coming back, Ian, to your question, the brands which are usually customized by these customizers are super polarizing brands with really strong communities. And the brands themselves are already hostage of that community. I mean, we just remember when Patek came out with that pilot watch, what happened? All hell broke loose from the Patek collectors. So even the brand is actually hostage from their collectors, which doesn't happen with less polarizing brands.
I always found the subject really interesting. Whenever I see a watch, I always look at the watch and think it could look different with a different strap. I'm a little bit of a strapaholic, so to speak. And Bamford's, I think Bamford committed the error of sometimes showing examples of bad taste. Of course, you can discuss what good taste is and what bad taste is. And it fell a little bit a victim of that. But and there were several other brands that were customizing Rolexes, but not just Rolexes, and also Patek. For instance, I always found that Project X Designs was the best one regarding taste. So I sent my friend Daniel Bourne a message and to ask him for his opinion, and I like to read because it's interesting. So he tells me it's fun, but too complicated to become a mainstream business. I think if you look at the original companies, no one is really investing anymore, except for Bamford. The concept is not really scalable. Customization is far more complex than high volume production. Sourcing watches is difficult. The work is expensive, so it's harder to make it work for smaller brands. Plus, with increased competition, it's just not worthwhile as a long-term investment. Bamford saved face with the LVMH deal, but let's be honest, who really wants a Zenith, let alone a customizer's Zenith? It's just a PR exercise. Sorry for that last bit.
One thing I'll say about Bamford, which might be the greatest trick he's pulled on the entire customization industry, is that he's never had to work a day in his life. And he's never, ever had to say, I'm going to go create a business to earn millions, to shift the watch industry. He was a customer and a collector, and he decided that he wanted his watches to be DLC, and he wanted some of them to have Snoopies on them. And he goes, some of my friends like that too, and now I'm going to set up a whole atelier so that my friends can come by and get what I like done to their watches. He's never had to sit there like, I'm assuming Titan Black, like all the other guys that do this kind of high street customization that we've all become, satiated with on Instagram nonstop. He doesn't care. He did it for himself. And he created what appeared to be an industry that now has caused, I'm sure, a lot of people to end up either, at best case, break even or probably lose money, like I'm assuming most of the other customizers do. But he's only ever done it out of passion. And there was never a point in his personal or professional career where he hasn't fully led every single decision that he's ever made, and I can say this as someone who's known him for about 5 years, through just pure passion. And so at the end of the day, he doesn't really care what any of you think. Like, he doesn't, he's his ultimate customer. And whether or not his company lives or dies, he can still customize watches for his friends and himself because he has access to the people that and the know-how to do so. So I think that he is in a position that is far stronger than anyone else who decides that they are going to become some sort of a watch customizer, with maybe a handful of exceptions, because he just loves it. If you've spent time with him, you go to his house, you go to his office, every day for the last 20 years, he's been collecting memorabilia, like the minutia of these watch brands. He's got Rolex pins from like the 70s. He's got clocks from the 40s and 50s. He's got desk accessories from every brand from all time. He is the ultimate watch fan. And like I said, if his company shuts down tomorrow, which it doesn't ever have to shut down, he just doesn't care. And he does it purely for passion. So anyone who sits there and tries to replicate his business, I think will ultimately be either, if not a failure, a cheap knockoff. And the people that choose to try to evaluate his business model as some sort of investment strategy, he's just giving you one of these. He doesn't care, which I think is why people respect what he does, because he does it for the right reasons. He's not somebody looking to turn some crazy profit. He might like to break even someday. He might like to be profitable. I don't know if he is or not. I don't have access to that, like I said. But he does it out of just pure passion for all of this stuff. And he owns all of the originals. He owns all of the proper Pateks. He owns all of the proper Rolexes. He owns stuff that would make our eyes bleed. And he chooses to spend his time and his free time, frankly, creating things for the people that he loves, who love the stuff that he loves.
We did a video report on George Bamford on the Watches TV, and I have to say that it's probably the report where we had the most polarizing comments. I mean, it was just unbelievable. The people were really people liked it, but many people were saying how crazy he is, and as you said, he doesn't care, and I think he's a pretty funny guy. Yeah. So another question?
So, sorry, me again. Just following up on the passionate collectors, what's the reaction to a Porsche 911 is as iconic before it's modified as a Rolex Explorer? If someone's posting photos of a modified 911, does it get the same kind of reaction?
If you thought that people in the comment section of Hodinkee or Blog to Watch or something else are catty and disgusting and depraved and depressed and lonely and aggressive in the way that they attack others for something that isn't even theirs, you have no idea what the Porsche community looks like. It is wild. Because what you're taking is something that is, one, geometrically larger, so there's just so much more of it to critique. So let's say the guy who started Singer, Rob, is a tremendous guy. The whole concept started because he viewed so many eras in the evolution of Porsche as significant to him. And he took elements of each one and made his own personal car for private use, not for public consumption. And even just the way that, so the grille on the back of a 911, it's slatted. It looks like a range. He made it, he drilled out holes into billet aluminum, kind of like a nice, beautiful pattern. People were freaked the hell out about that. Like there was articles written, they were like, this guy's out of his mind. He's putting in a drilled out circle grill instead of a traditional grill. There's so much more to fuss over. If you're reading an article in Shifted magazine or Hodinkee or any of these magazines that's talking about what any of these watches have had done to them, or whether the lugs were polished, you've got 2 square inches to critique. With a car, you've got paint depth, you have material depth, you have people that have $100,000 instruments that use x-rays to measure whether or not the VIN plate has been moved by a micrometer. It is so obsessively, disgustingly nitpicky that you have no idea, because it's just geometrically larger. So to draw a parallel to the Porsche community, for instance, it's the same but way worse.
Nowadays, I think you guys talked a lot about customization more than bespoke, and I wanted to go into the idea, and I wanted to actually ask Max to develop his idea further because he has the best experience of both sides of the coin in dealing with customization. And that the idea that someone could come along and change something after you've spent, let's say in the car industry, billions of dollars developing it, but just because you want bigger wheels or wider wheels, you're actually destroying something that's, in their eyes, perfect. So that's why. And the idea of modification comes down to the amount of followers something has. So if you're changing a Tag Heuer, no one really cares too much. It's like modifying a Mitsubishi. But if you're changing maybe a Rolex, then suddenly you've got a lot more people caring because you know, this is you're going up in the level. So my idea to Max is that nowadays, if you look at Ferrari, they do one-off customizations, one-off. So a customer can come, give a minimum of, I think, is $2 million, and they'll create a one-off vehicle just for them. So it's not a question of modification. This is almost like ground up. So if someone came to you and said, here's $1 million, but develop something you created, so they're actually being patron of the arts. They're not getting involved. They're not doing anything. I just want something so remarkable, and I want it for me. Why would you say no to that? Because, in fact, some of the best brands on earth right now survived by having patrons of the arts. And they now look back, and they create legacies of those. So why wouldn't you go down that road?
Well, first of all, it hasn't happened. Second, I think my freedom, I created MB&F. The ultimate goal was the ultimate freedom. Freedom from shareholders, freedom from the market, freedom from having to deal with people which didn't have the same ethics. And let's imagine the person is got the ethics, got everything. I will still have to owe him something. And I'm scared of that. I really am terrified of owing something to somebody. And so my gut feeling tells me no, but bring it along. Let's see. I don't know, but it's true. It's my gut feeling says no.
Rolls-Royce is a company that was in a very similar position up until very recently, until a guy named Sam Lee came along and wrote a check so blisteringly big that they made a car that, you know, the swept tail car that ultimately incorporated all the elements of the next generation of Rolls-Royce about 2 months before that they released it. So, you know, I think money talks, as Max alluded to.
We are perhaps assisting in a historical moment. You perhaps changed his mind. So please be the first to order a bespoke watch tomorrow morning.
Spent the money, I think. Sam Lee commissioned a 26-foot-long car that has 2 seats. It's a disaster. That car has value to him in a way that it will not have value to anyone else. And I don't think Sam Lee thought about the resale value for a second about that car, because he said to himself, this is something that I truly want. I want it to have 2 seats. I want it to be grand. I want it to feel like a Riva boat for the street. It is something that I want. And I don't care if anyone else wants it after me. If my grandson wants it, fine. If he doesn't, like I said, it's fine.
I'll just answer partially your question. If you want to be a patron to a creator, you buy one of his pieces. What I mean is, if you buy a Porsche, the great car, they make 180,000 cars a year. You buy a Porsche, you don't buy a Porsche, they don't care about you. You buy a Pagani from Horacio Pagani, who makes 25 cars a year, you're actually part of the creative process. Meaning the guys who bought the Zonda allowed Horacio to create the Huayra. The guys who bought the Huayra allowed him to create the next ones. I don't think you have to go to bespoke for that. You are, when you buy a piece from Kari Voutilainen or from Urwerk or from De Bethune or whatever, you're actually part of the creative process and you're helping them create the next piece. And I think that's a fundamental difference with buying a piece from a great established brand.
On that note, I think this is the end of our panel. Or is another question? One more question, please.
I just wanted to ask about if you have brands like Rolex, for example, that spend tens of millions of dollars on branding, and you have someone like Bamford coming in and, you know, putting Snoopy's on the watch, isn't that sort of going on their territory and costing them money because they have to spend more on reinforcing their brand image by this disruptor that comes in and just goes, you know what, I'll just place it as a, a fun thing rather than an aspirational item.
Do you know how much it costs to be the official timekeeper of Formula One?
I'm guessing a lot.
A fuck ton of money. Like a lot of money. Anything that Bamford did would always be a drop in the bucket to Rolex. There's no amount of money that Bamford could generate in revenue that would ever possibly even remotely impact anything to do with Rolex. And I think that, but your question was more, is he either eroding their marketing efforts by creating something very limited with an official brand like the Charles Schulz Foundation that owns the rights to Snoopy? I think that he made something like 50 watches total with Snoopy in collaboration with Philip Colbert, the artist that's based in London. Those were sold only through the Colette boutique to a very small group of people. We're talking about just such geometrically different numbers. Like, how many date chests did they make last year? Do we even know the number? It's crazy.
You need to accept that when you've sold a piece, it's owned by somebody who can do whatever they want with it. I mean, you have to let that go. I know a lot of brand owners who get really upset if you buy one of their pieces and then you sell it in auction or whatever. And then they say, oh, you can't be a client anymore. And I get it. But at the end of the day, I have one client who had, in Asia, had 5, 6 of my pieces, and one of them was one of the only watch pieces, a piece unique. And for whatever reason, he decided one day to, in a gunshot deal, to give everything to a merchant who sells out of the back of his car. And then he didn't even dare talk to me anymore. And I was like, I'm not upset with you. You could have called me before and I would have probably bought the only watch back. That would have been nice. But you bought those watches. You can do whatever you want with them. You want to put a steamroller over them? Like, it's your watches. But I don't know what, for whatever reasons, brands get super paranoid about what the people are allowed to do with their pieces after they've bought it. It's theirs, in my opinion.
Just going back to the Porsche example, because I used to collect them in the past. Like, you had people like Roof, like Strosek, Gambala, and then they didn't have such big issues the same way that, a guy with dreads came in and, and got all sorts of issues. I think it's maybe more, maybe going back to the insecurity, but more of the image that it portrayed, or maybe the whole of knocking on the door versus buying and then doing it without these guys knowing, and then just getting a following where they want a piece of the action.
You're talking to a guy who's wearing a Roof pin on his lapel. Roof is an exceptional example of somebody that has been working with Porsche as an integral part of the Porsche story since 1955. The company started in 1937. When Roof this year at the Geneva Auto Show released the CTR Yellowbird 2017, the entire Porsche family came over and kissed Alois Roof on the cheek and said congratulations on a tremendous car. On that same day, they served papers to Singer. So if your question is how do you operate within the confines of a brand like Porsche or a brand like Rolex, you kiss the ring. And you do it in a way, and if you go to Roof's showroom, if you go to his garage, I'll be there in 2 weeks. Every single mechanic in there had worked at Porsche for a minimum of 2 decades. He employs people that have retired from Porsche overwhelmingly in proportion to new blood. He is part of the Porsche family. Singer came along and they said, we can do better. Roof knew they could do better. They were the first company to ever push a Porsche over 200 miles an hour. They've always been perceived to be the ultimate customizer of Roof. When Singer came along, there was a lot of hubris involved, and they were British, based in LA. Germans have no time for that. But if you're based in Pfaffenhaus in the middle of nowhere, about an hour north of Munich, and you devote your entire life's mission to perfecting something that's already perfect, Porsche respects that. I think there's a lot to do with Rolex's relationship with the United Kingdom, their relationship with somebody who is hubristic and is kind of loud and fun and exciting to be around as George Bamford, why they didn't embrace him. Roof's part of the establishment. Singer is not. I think that's the difference I would say there.
But if the question is whether customization can impact a brand and reinforce a brand, I think it does. For a small brand, it can be positive. Because by making something so unique, you tie in the person into the process, and he becomes the first spokesperson. And a smaller brand needs word of mouth more than anything else. So yes, it's a double sword blade, or double blade sword.
Good. And now on that final note, thank you very much for attending this panel, and thanks for the panelists.
Now we can have a drink.